Peugeot 205 GTI 1.6 beat its faster 1.9 sibling. 7 times a slower car was the better car. Not the quicker one, not the one with the bigger number on the spec sheet, the slower one. The one that got beaten off the line and then quietly humiliated its rival everywhere else. Here's the premise. Somewhere along the way, we all agreed that more power equals more car, and the car industry has spent 40 years happily selling us that idea. But the machines enthusiasts still cry about at 3 in the morning are almost never the fastest version. They're the lighter one, the smaller engined one, the one that got the wrong cam profile. So why did Peugeot ruin its own hot hatch by making it faster? And how did a 118 horsepower Lotus manage to embarrass cars with double the output? Stick around, because number 1 is the cheapest car on this list, and it might be the best of the lot. Let's start in 1984 in France with the Peugeot 205 GTI. The original 205 GTI arrived with a 1,580 cubic centimeter 4-cylinder, Bosch fuel injection, 105 horsepower, and a curb weight that Peugeot quoted at around 850 kilograms. That is roughly the weight of a modern Golf's doors and airbags. The steering had no power assistance at first, the gearshift was a bit vague, and the whole thing felt like it had been designed by people who genuinely enjoyed driving to work. Peugeot then did what every manufacturer does. Rivals got faster, so Peugeot went bigger, and in 1986 out came the 1.9 with 130 horsepower, larger front discs, half-leather seats, and a top speed north of 120 miles per hour. On paper, it was the better car. 0 to 60 dropped to around 7.5 seconds, which in the mid-80s made it quicker than a lot of things wearing Porsche badges. Except the 1.9 was heavier over the nose, the long-stroke engine ran out of enthusiasm earlier, and Peugeot fitted it with a different rear beam setup and lower gearing that made the car's famous lift-off oversteer rather more of a lifestyle choice than a party trick. Here's the thing the spec sheet hid. The extra weight over the front axle actually blunted the 1.9's power-to-weight ratio advantage on a real road, and the 205 developed a reputation for putting confident drivers into hedgerows backwards. It was almost always the 1.9 doing it. The 1.6, meanwhile, revved harder, turned in sweeter, and needed to be driven flat out to get anywhere, which is precisely why it was so good. Britain's motoring press said as much repeatedly through the late 80s, and today, the 1.6 is the one collectors quietly fight over. The slower car won. Our next pick cost about 3 times as much, and came from a company that had never built a sports car before. In 1990, Honda launched the NSX. It used an all-aluminium monocoque, the first ever on a production car, which reportedly saved around 200 kilograms compared with an equivalent steel structure. Behind the driver sat a 3.0-liter V6 with VTEC, 270 horsepower, and the whole thing weighed roughly 1,370 kilograms. Its target was the Ferrari 348, which had 300 horsepower and a badge worth more than most houses. The Ferrari was faster in a straight line. Everyone agreed on that. What nobody expected was that the Honda would be better at everything else. Honda had Ayrton Senna drive prototypes at Suzuka and at the Nürburgring, and Senna reportedly told the engineers the chassis felt too flexible, so Honda went back and stiffened it by a claimed 50%. The result was a mid-engine supercar with pedal weights that made sense, a gear shift that worked in the rain, visibility inspired by an F-16 cockpit, and an engine that would do 8,000 revolutions per minute for 100,000 miles without setting fire to your driveway. Contemporary road tests were blunt about it. The Ferrari was more exciting for 10 minutes. The Honda was better for 10 years. Gordon Murray was so taken with the NSX that he has said many times it directly influenced the McLaren F1. He reportedly bought one and used it as the benchmark for how a road car should feel. Think about that. A 270 horsepower Japanese coupe set the standard for a 627 horsepower V12 hypercar. Number 5 is where things get properly silly, because this one had 118 horsepower and a fiberglass tub. The Lotus Elise Series 1 arrived in 1996, and to understand it, you have to understand the man whose company built it. Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, had one guiding rule that he preached for decades: simplify, then add lightness. Chapman had been dead for over a decade by the time the Elise arrived, but the S1 is arguably the purest expression of that idea Lotus ever put into production. It used an extruded and bonded aluminium chassis weighing around 68 kilograms on its own, a Rover K Series 1.8 making 118 horsepower and a total curb weight of about 725 kilograms. It had no power steering, no anti-lock brakes for most of the run, no airbags, and a roof that took 2 people and a service manual to fit. 0 to 60 took about 5.9 seconds, which even in 1996 was not remarkable. A Porsche 911 of the same year would eat it on a motorway slip road. But on a British B road, the Elise did something almost no car does, which was to give you the whole experience at legal speeds. You could feel the front tires loading up through unassisted steering. You could brake with your ankle. It used metal matrix composite brake discs on early cars, an aluminium alloy reinforced with silicon carbide particles borrowed from aerospace, mostly because Lotus needed to save weight everywhere. Lotus later sold you more power. The 111S got 143 horsepower, then the Series 2 grew, then the Toyota engines came, and each generation was faster and slightly less magical. Ask around at any Lotus meet, and the S1 owners will tell you, at length and without being asked, that the 118 horsepower one is the pure one. They're right, and they will tell you again in about 4 minutes. Our next entry involves Renault building one of the maddest hot hatches ever made, and then being comprehensively beaten by its own cheaper model. In 2001, Renault Sport launched the Clio 255. They took a Clio, threw out the rear seats, and installed a 3.0-liter V6 behind the driver, 230 horsepower in Phase 1 form. Later, 255. It was built with help from Tom Walkinshaw Racing in Sweden. It weighed around 1,400 kilograms, and it had a wheelbase shorter than its own track width, which is the kind of detail that makes suspension engineers go very quiet. It was also, by most accounts, borderline dangerous. Phase 1 cars had a reputation for snapping into oversteer with almost no warning, and Renault revised the geometry substantially for Phase 2. Top Gear tested 1, and the abiding memory is of a car that felt like it wanted to swap ends every time you breathed on the throttle. Meanwhile, in the same showroom sat the Clio 182 Trophy, front-wheel drive, 2.0-liter, 182 horsepower, and around 1,090 kilograms. The Trophy's party piece was its Sachs remote reservoir dampers, developed with input from the Renault Sport engineers, which allowed enormous wheel travel and a level of body control that made British roads look flat. The V6 cost roughly twice as much. The Trophy was 3 seconds slower to 100 miles per hour, and on any real road, the Trophy was so much faster and so much more fun that it became a bit of a joke among journalists. Only 550 Trophies came to the UK, and they're now worth serious money. The Clio V6 is worth money too, but mostly to people who like living dangerously. That same lesson, that a small front driver can humiliate its exotic sibling, takes us to Japan, and to a car that launched to lukewarm reviews and then refused to die. The Toyota GT86 and Subaru BRZ arrived in 2012 with Subaru's FA20 Flat 4. a 2.0-liter boxer with a square 86 by 86 mm bore and stroke, the same 86 figure Toyota named the car after. It made 197 horsepower. The car weighed around 1,230 kilograms, and it rode on skinny Michelin primacy tires taken more or less straight off the Prius parts shelf. 0 to 60 was about 7.6 seconds. A Nissan 370Z of the same era had 332 horsepower and would leave it for dead. Chief engineer Tetsuya Tada was completely unapologetic about the numbers. He has said in multiple interviews that the low-grip tires were a deliberate choice because he wanted a car whose limits you could explore without a racing license or an insurance claim. The flat force sat as low as physically possible. The driver's hip point was down near the floor, and the whole car was built around a claimed center of gravity height, comparable to some mid-engined machinery. The internet complained about the power for about 6 years. Then something odd happened. The GT86 became the default choice for track day novices, drift schools, and time attack builders across 3 continents, while the 370Z quietly turned into a heavy, thirsty thing that mostly got sold to people who wanted a quick car for $8,000. Toyota sold the concept so well that they came back and did it again with the GR86, and even then they only added about 30 horsepower. Number 2 comes from Stuttgart, and it's the one Porsche spent years actively trying to prevent. Porsche's own product hierarchy said the 911 Turbo had to be the flagship. In 2015, the 911 Turbo S made 560 horsepower and would hit 60 in under 3 seconds, which is genuinely difficult to comprehend from the driver's seat. The Cayman GT4, launched the same year, had 385 horsepower from a 3.8-liter flat 6 lifted out of the 991 Carrera S, a manual gearbox only, brakes and front suspension components borrowed from the 911 GT3, and about 1,340 kilograms to shift. The Turbo S was around 4 seconds a lap quicker at most circuits and cost roughly double. Nobody cared. The GT4 sold out almost instantly, prices went above list within months, and journalists who drove both back-to-back kept writing the same thing. The mid-engined car with less power told you more about what was happening at the tires. Andreas Preuninger's GT division has more or less admitted over the years that internal politics limited what the Cayman was allowed to be, and every time they let it off the leash. The GT4, the GT4 RS, the 718 Spider, enthusiasts have voted with their wallets against the faster car in the next showroom, which brings us to number 1, and it's the cheapest car on the list by a comfortable margin. Mazda MX-5, the NA, launched in 1989 with a 1.6-liter twin-cam, making 114 horsepower, a curb weight of about 955 kilograms, double wishbones at all 4 corners, and a gear shift that Mazda's engineers reportedly obsessed over to the point of prototyping the throw length dozens of times. Bob Hall, the American journalist who first pitched the idea to Mazda management, and Toshihiko Hirai, the program manager, had a stated goal of recreating the feeling of a Lotus Elan without the part where it dissolves in the rain. The whole thing was built around a Mazda philosophy they call Jinba Itai, horse and rider as one. The idea that the car should respond to the driver as instinctively as a well-trained horse responds to its rider. 0 to 60 took a shade over 8 seconds. Contemporary Nissan 300ZX turbos had 300 horsepower and would pull away from it like it was tethered to a lamppost. It didn't matter even slightly. The MX-5 went on to become the best-selling 2-seat sports car in history, over 1 million units, and it did it by being slow, honest, cheap to run, and almost impossible to get bored of. Here's the part I find most telling. Every generation since has been offered with more power, and Mazda has repeatedly gone back to the drawing board to cut weight instead. The ND launched in 2015, weighing roughly 100 kilograms less than the NC it replaced, and the entry-level 1.5-liter car with 130 horsepower is, according to a rather large number of people who have driven both, the sweeter thing to drive than the 2.0. 35 years on, Mazda is still chasing Jinba Itai and still proving the same point. The slower one is the better one. Before we wrap up, a couple of honorable mentions that just missed the cut. The BMW E30 M3 is the obvious one. Its 2.3-liter S14 four-cylinder made around 200 horsepower, which the later, heavier E36 M3 comfortably beat with its 286 horsepower straight six. And yet it's the lighter, revier, homologation special E30 that commands six-figure prices today, precisely because it feels more alive at the limit. The same story plays out with Subaru's Impreza. Plenty of enthusiasts will tell you the naturally aspirated or lower-powered versions handle sweeter than the peakier turbocharged monsters everyone chased at the time. Neither quite made the 7, but both prove the pattern holds. So there's the pattern, and it's not subtle. Lightness, response, and being able to use everything the car has got will beat a big number on a spec sheet 9 times out of 10. And the people who make these cars mostly know it. They just can't put it in an advert. Now I want to hear from you, and specifically, I want an argument. Which slower car do you think beats its faster sibling? Is it the 1.6 205 against the 1.9, the base MX-5 against the tuned ones, or the E30 M3 against the E36? Tell me in the comments. And more broadly, what story about cars do you want me to cover next? Drop it below, because that's genuinely where I get most of my ideas. If you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe so the next one turns up in your feed. I'll see you in the next video.